All right, well, welcome to our next session of Career Chat for Operations Management. We have a special guest, John Ferarro from HP. He specializes in operations. Right now, he is overseeing operations in Singapore, but he used to oversee the operations here in San Diego. John, welcome back. You are an alum of SDSU, so we really appreciate you spending some time with our students.
It's great to be here. Thanks.
Well, to get started, why don't you just tell us a little bit about your career at HP and what you've been doing in operations there?
Sure, absolutely. So after graduating with engineering master's, mechanical engineering, I started to work for HP. That was about 28 years ago, with the intentions of I'll work there for a couple of years and then I'll go jump around to another company so I can learn and diversify my skill sets. And 28 years later, I'm still here at HP. But I have been able to jump around and do a number of different things, from research and development to some advanced technology and system development work to manufacturing and operations roles. Spent about 6 years managing a P&L inside of HP, which was very, very fun, but different. And then now I'm in a role overseeing operations inside of HP's print business. So our print business, most of you, I'm sure, appreciate, we make everything from a small little handheld printer that you can print a photograph with, to a printer that sits on your desk or at the end of an aisle in an office, to what you maybe don't see too much of are industrial or commercial printing devices that do things such as you go into a store, you'll see signage, point of sale displays. You'll see a bus driving down the street or a car that's wrapped in some graphics. You order a book on Amazon, or even in some of the retail outlets, very high quality packaging applications, and we make printing devices that service all those markets. And my role now is one where I own the operations of the manufacturing of all the print heads and ink cartridges that feed HP's print business.
Yeah, I would see those wraps on our metro trains. So are they one of your clients? Do you know?
I don't know for sure, but likely, yes. There's only a few sort of print companies out there that do applications like that. So let's hope it's HP.
Okay. Well, what is your primary role right now as director? You mentioned that a little bit, but can you get into who you're actually overseeing within the manufacturing operations? And specifically, I guess you're now based in Singapore.
Yeah, exactly. So I did relocate to Singapore just a couple of weeks ago. I had transitioned into this role. It's been about three months now. So underneath my responsibilities, I have a team of department managers who have their staffs, and essentially what we do is we've got manufacturing assets around the world that are responsible for producing all those print heads and ink cartridges that our customers need to ensure their printing devices are working properly. So we do a lot of manufacturing in our own walls, staffed by HP badged people, but we also do a lot of manufacturing or outsourcing to contract manufacturers. So part of the responsibility is one, setting up those right relationships, and then obviously managing those partnerships for shared success over time.
That's a great point. Those relationships, that's not something I traditionally think of when I think of internal operations at a company. But I would imagine that they're extremely important, especially, when you get to the executive levels.
Oh, absolutely. You don't, you're not successful in today's markets if you don't have the right partnerships. I mean, you can work to be extremely vertically integrated, and in some places we do that, but we also acknowledge that there's other great companies out there who do some things better than we do. And we look to seek those out and strike partnerships that are advantageous for both companies. One thing in the manufacturing world, I mean, our volumes can fluctuate pretty dramatically. And at least for us, sort of flexing your workforce up and down is not something that I would say fits within our culture, nor is easy to do. If you're a manager and you've got to let people go, that's one of the more difficult things you got to do. You work with a contract manufacturer who's doing manufacturing for many people, and my needs may go down. They've got another partner whose needs may go up, so they can shift workforces around and mitigate that in a way that we just can't. So that's one example of a partnership that definitely is a win-win.
On your team, do you have professionals such as analysts and supply chain working under you, or are those different departments at HP?
Those are partner organizations, the way we're structured inside of HP, but clearly very, very important ones. A couple of the folks on the phone here are interested in data and in big analytics. We absolutely make investments in those sorts of things to gather information from the customer as they use our products, and they feed that back to us so we can do things better the next time. We've got some services. Instant Ink is one of them, where we use a lot of big data and analytics to make sure you as a customer don't run out of ink, that the new supply shows up right before it does that. And elements of value and convenience for the customer. Supply chain is absolutely critical. We're obviously manufacturing physical products, which rely on, we call them lower level materials, plastic parts, Acumen chips that we encode data into. We're printing, so there's inks in there, and a lot of those come from strategic partners, and making sure we can get those at cost, at quality, and when we need them is key.
Well, thanks to a referral from you, we have a team of MBA students working with a colleague of yours, Brett.
Oh, excellent. Yep.
New product development that has to do with encoding data information into paper. So it's really interesting. Do you also do new product development under your expert or your department, or is that more here in the States?
Yeah, so we have two forms of new product development. One of them I'll characterize as sort of the next innovation that we'll bring to market to meet some customer need. Those typically get done out of a research and development group. As those products are being developed, there's always an operations person who's part of that development team. Basically, and their role is helping make sure what's being designed is ultimately manufacturable. If you can only make one of them in a lab, it's very difficult to scale that and ultimately sort of make money for the company. So there's that partnership. There's other new products, which we call extensions of existing technology that we're already manufacturing. So we definitely look to leverage our scale when you put manufacturing assets in place, big capital, big steel, think depreciation dollars hitting your P&L over time. You want to make sure you get as much out of those assets as possible. So we will take those manufacturing assets and existing print heads and ink supplies, and we'll make subtle modifications to them to enable us to go into new markets. So that element of new product development is happening inside of my organization.
That's very cool. Being in San Diego, so before you transitioned here, how much did you work with your international offices, or was that something that you didn't get a chance to interact with as much?
Oh, the role is absolutely global, no matter where you're at. I mean, I was on the phone just last night in Singapore with my colleagues back in San Diego. So we have locations, a number of them along the West Coast. San Diego's one. I call it the mothership, or headquarters is in Palo Alto, the Bay Area. And then Corvallis in Vancouver on the West Coast. We got operations in Israel, in Barcelona, in Singapore, China. So yeah, we're all over the place, and that's intentional. From an operations perspective, we get very specific on where we put manufacturing assets. Several things drive that. One is clearly access to labor and labor at the right rate. The other is an increasing need to get market access into a region. You have to have some presence of your corporation doing business in that region, and we use that to influence our manufacturing strategies. And then logistics costs. I mean, you don't want to manufacture in one spot and you've got to ship it around the world. Obviously oversimplifying, but the printing, our ink containers are fluids. So think about shipping water. You don't want to get water in, say, California and try to ship it to someplace in Europe. It just doesn't make sense. So yeah, absolutely a global footprint.
For our students that are looking to transition from a different career into operations, can you basically define in your words what the profession of operations management is, whether it's applicable to HP or other companies? And how would you define success in that role?
Absolutely. Yeah. So as you've seen or maybe heard from my educational background, I was never formally trained in operations. I was a engineering guy for a while, went to the greatest university on the planet, SDSU, to get my MBA, studied marketing and management. But as you folks are appreciating, you get to dabble in many sort of disciplines required for business success, and operations was one of them. But I've been in roles where I've worked with and now certainly own an operations function. And I would simply define it with 3 words: cost, quality, and availability. And sort of metrics or indicators of success are rooted in those 3. For us, we always tend to prioritize availability. If you're not making what the customer wants and getting it to them when they want it and where they want it, you're not selling it. And obviously, if you're not selling, you're not generating revenue and margin. Cost is extremely important in the operations world. Tends to have a huge influence over a product's cost structure. Talked a little bit about sort of manufacturing assets. They can be very steel and labor intensive. You got to do those in a way that are efficient. So your cost is important because it ultimately leads to how you price to the customer, which needs to support a value proposition that is usually rooted in cost. And if your cost structure is off, you're eroding margin for the company and affecting profitability. And then quality, you gotta meet quality standards of the customer. If you're not doing that, then probably your competitors are, and you're going to lose share and you're going to lose profitability.
I think a lot of your description, and including some from your previous answers, have kind of identified many of the ways that operations impact HP. Are there some other ways that we haven't talked about that operations impacts the bottom line at HP?
Yeah. So yeah, if you reflect back on what we've discussed already, the linkage with R&D is key. There's a big linkage with finance and supply chain. Marketing's another one. For us inside of HP, forecasts usually come from our marketing organization. And if those are off, either high or low, there's big implications, either cost or availability. So the partnership there is very, very key. Some that maybe are newer or maybe you don't have much visibility to. So corporate sustainability is an interesting one that's becoming more and more important. The acknowledgement of doing things in a sustainable way is only growing. Customers are demanding that of products that they buy. And operations can have a very big environmental footprint if you don't do it right. Energy consumption, raw material consumption. So we do a lot to inside of our circle of reduce, reuse, recycle, and an operations entity has a big deal to do with that. There's a relationship with legal and public relations as well. the market access piece is big. And there's tax incentives often when you place certain manufacturing or R&D functions in certain parts of the world. I mean, Singapore is one of them. It's one of the reasons why we're here, is we have a very phenomenal relationship with the government. We bring technology and operations functions here, and in return, they help us with tax incentives and investments in us doing those things in this country.
Mhm. I work for a few big companies myself, Caesars Entertainment, the Walt Disney Company. And as students or people looking to go into these workplaces, operations isn't necessarily the target that they have. But I've always seen operations as kind of being a spoke and wheel type of position, where all of those other types of roles are satellite to operations, and operations is in the center of everything. Would you say that's an accurate description?
I think that's fair. I probably think it's fair for every discipline to oftentimes put themselves in the center of a chart and saying all things sort of revolve around us. But yeah, clearly a company is not successful if they don't have all those entities working synergistically. But if you're not able to make something, you're not able to sell something. So yes, let's put operations in the center of that wheel.
Okay, I was a marketing guy, so I'm not being self-serving when I say that.
Okay, very good.
So how about tools that you use in your job? What would you say are the most important information systems and the most important type of soft skills that you use on a daily basis?
Yeah. So we have a very big instance of SAP. We absolutely use that for what's coming in and what's going out. We use a lot of Power BI to keep us updated on just how operations are performing, real-time dashboards that engineers are watching. Yield starts to deviate. We try to be very, very proactive in things. We'll have data coming in even from our supply chain partners, where you could have a lot of material that's skewed one way inside of a specification range. We know that's coming into our factory before it shows up, and we use that to sort of track how those parts flow through the factory and ultimately turn into a finished product. If we talk a little bit about skills required in an operations role, I mean, a lot of these aren't specific to operations, but things like problem solving is a big deal. We do a lot of that. We very much value people who can take, I mean, data is great. You take data and you turn it into information, and information's nice, but the person who can take information and drive action, that's really what we are looking for. And it's extremely important inside of an operations world. You got $10 million worth of inventory that's at risk. You want to be very efficient in going through a methodical process of assessing the risk and how do you disposition that material, from containing it to controlling what you're continuing to build, to correcting the problem and ultimately releasing the parts. I think mindset is pretty important inside of an operations role. And if I draw a distinction between, say, an R&D person and an operations person, and this is where you need to be kind of self-aware of who you are. If you're someone who likes to get the first one to work and that's success and motivating for you, I tend to characterize that as more of an R&D type mindset. If you're someone who looks at a process and it's at 98% yield and you're like, well, I'm going to get it to 99% yield, and you love doing those sorts of things, that's sort of an operations type of mindset set. A senior operations guy inside of HP said something pretty powerful to me, and he was asked the question, how do you say, you said you're going to save $1 billion next year. How the heck do you go about coming up with a plan to save $1 billion from your cost structure? And he didn't even blink. He said, well, you do it one penny at a time. So these mindset things, I think, are what defines someone who's going to be successful in an operations role.
With that said, when you're hiring to your team, how much emphasis do you put on parts like 5 to 7 years experience, must have, these information systems experience in them, versus how much do you go out and look for people who have those soft skills, who have the attitude, the mindset? Where do you put more emphasis on as you look for talent?
Yeah. So over the past, let's say 5-8 years, we've indexed more towards graduates coming out of college, whether it's an undergraduate degree or a master's level degree, whether it's technology or even business. We definitely look for soft skills, fit inside of company culture, having knowledge of specific tools, like I mentioned, and there's a plethora of them out there, it is good. Sometimes required for the job. We really look for, I mean, most interviews are centered on how do you approach a problem and solve a problem? How do you do that sort of mechanistically, and how do you do that when you're working with people from different disciplines? That's probably the most important thing to think about if you go into an interview with, certainly with HP, and I think a lot of other companies have sort of a similar sort of mindset.
Great. You talk about the problem solving. Do you do case study type of interviews, or is it just you give them a problem and just try to analyze their thought process and analyzing?
It is very much like case studies. I remember back when I was doing my MBA, the case studies were wonderful. You got a lot out of them. So yeah, we'll present you with a set of facts that frame the situation, and what are you going to do? And we listen, and oftentimes we'll go back and forth, like sometimes you do in a case study. But yeah, we try to put you in real world situations and how you're going to navigate it.
That's good to know. I'll make a note of that as I'm preparing my students when they apply for jobs over at HP. How important do you say referrals are to being hired? Do you do more hiring by referral, or is the online application still the #1 way for your team?
Oh, I'd say if you know somebody, your network, that's probably the best way. Sort of a reference from someone in the company that knows maybe not necessarily all of your skills, but just knows who you are and can advocate for you. It goes a long way. I encourage folks to really find out who the hiring managers are inside of a company for a specific position. Oftentimes you'll have an HR partner, and they're posting a job requisition, and they're looking at a stack full of resumes. You got to find some way to differentiate yourself, know the company, what the company's about. And if you can find a way to get to know the hiring manager, or at least the person's contact information, and you drop them an email, those sorts of things go a long way. But if you know somebody inside, that's huge.
I appreciate you saying that. It makes my job easier because I'm telling our students that every day, but I don't know that they always believe me. So hearing it from somebody like you will really help get them to buy into that process.
No, and yeah, I'll put this on even video. I have no problem with this. I love to sort of provide some help back to people who have helped me, and SDSU's one of them. I have no problem setting up a 30-minute call with someone who's applying for a job at HP, and I'll tell you what I know to help you through that interview process. No problem.
That's much appreciated. And you have been an outstanding partner to our business school. I'm sure that you're also connected with other schools as well, but certainly appreciate all the work you've done with our students.
Well, you're welcome.
So thinking about trends of the industry, what kind of the greatest challenges have you faced in operations lately? I know COVID, supply chain issues are some of them. What are you seeing?
Yeah, COVID has been crazy. Um, where to start? So our print business is an interesting one. I mentioned we do stuff in the home and stuff in the office, and not many people are going into the office. So that part of our print business is really fallen off. People are doing an awful lot more printing at home, and that threw just a huge sort of curveball towards our operations organization. We had too much capacity of one and not enough capacity of another, and navigating that was really a big deal. Cybersecurity recently has become more and more of an issue for us. So we've spent a lot of money just hardening the software assets we have managing our production lines, which is something we weren't worried about so much 8 years ago. You mentioned access to parts. We've had some of our hardware businesses really impacted. Certainly our PC business, just getting some of the chips has throttled our ability to sell. And even on the people side of things. So here in Singapore, some of our factories are sort of staffed and run by people from Malaysia. You don't get to do that when they shut down the border because of COVID. So what do you do when your workforce is on the other side of a border? That was a tricky one for us. Wound up renting dormitories, and we have people living in those dormitories who are running our factories. So how do you keep them happy when they're not going back home to see their families for extended periods of time? So the types of things you wouldn't have had to really deal with pre-COVID.
Yeah, and I think industry trends that I've been observing, cybersecurity, even for our data analysts, that might be an area for you to look at, the supply chain, all of those things that you said, really hot areas, and that's where job growth is really high. So if you're looking to align yourself with a high growth area, those are good recommendations.
Absolutely.
Well, many of our students are trying to just advance within their own organizations. I shouldn't say just advance, that's an important goal. We do have other students who are still trying to figure out where they want to be as they're getting their MBA. You were an engineer when you came to get your MBA. At what point did you find out that operations might be a role and an area that you could make a career out of?
Yeah, so I mean, one of the main reasons I went back to get my MBA was to sort of learn the languages of the other functions inside of a company. I mean, I knew the engineering speak from the previous education, but how do you talk marketing? How do you talk HR? How do you talk supply chain and these sorts of things? And depending on sort of the day of the week, I'm motivated by getting the first one to work, and the other days of the week I like to go from 98 to 99% yield. So I was always intrigued with an operations role. When I look at the criticality of it inside of what HP is doing, that was definitely motivating for me. And then I've always had mentors and a network inside of HP that I've sought counsel from on sort of my career aspirations and what should I do next. And as you're progressing that job ladder, it's not always up. There are many times when you have to go across to broaden your skill sets, experiences, and even your own personal network for you to then take a step up inside of an organization. So out of both personal interest and sort of career aspiration, that led me into roles inside of operations.
For those students that are looking to move up with their organizations, maybe they're engineer at HP getting their MBA right now. What kind of things would help them to get the attention of the executives and have the executives see them being more leaders and moving up in the organization?
Yeah, so I would start by saying look for opportunities where you can show your leadership capabilities now. Don't wait. Um, we're not a company or a culture of I'm going to put you in a position and then see if you can do it. We tend to put people in positions who are almost already doing most elements of the job, leadership being a big one of them. There are always sort of special projects, I will call them. There are employee groups inside of companies that are typically centered around philanthropic or engagement types of activities. Get yourself involved in those, and maybe even more than just involved. Play a leadership role in some of them, so you get visibility and exposure. And that I find often helps people develop skills and allow them to showcase those skills inside of a company. And you'll eventually get somebody's attention. And hey, I want that person working for me.
You mentioned mentorship in your previous answer. Do you currently have a mentor? How have mentors helped shape your career? And are you currently mentoring anybody?
Yes, and yes. I've had formal mentors, and what I mean by that is that there could be a specific element of my development plan. I mean, no one's ever perfect. You've always got something that you can or want to work on. One way to do that is identify a mentor who's a recognized expert in that, and they coach you, give you a project where you can learn and demonstrate that. So I've done that throughout the years. I have what I call informal mentors. Probably more accurately, I have a network of senior managers who I seek counsel from. For example, this position I have here in Singapore, I had known senior leaders for many years, and my message to them was once my youngest goes off to college, I'm very geographically flexible and I want to do an overseas assignment for the experience. And they knew that from that relationship, and voila, here I am now sitting in Singapore. And I do mentor others. I'm currently mentoring, I think, 3 individuals from back in the States. Part of my role here in Singapore is to mentor the future leaders that will come from Singapore. So members of my direct staff, as well as some others, I am starting to formally mentor in the area of leadership and entrepreneurship.
Awesome. I appreciate that answer. And I do encourage our students not only think about the networking, but think about finding those mentors who can help shape your career as well. How about things that our students can do outside of the classroom to help them be successful in operations management?
Outside of the classroom. So someone who's already working or someone who's really just a full-time student, Greg?
I guess it could be either. For instance, do you see spending certain times in student organizations as being something that's attractive? Do you think that even if you're a working student, you should consider getting an internship within a certain organization to help educate you? What are the things that might make them look good or develop the necessary skills that they need at HP?
Yeah, so if there are certainly other skills or tools that you can develop yourself along outside of what you're taking in just your MBA classes, I think those are good. Real examples of applications of things you learn are much more powerful than kind of showing up with a piece of paper that says I took this course. Great. I went to the hardware store and I bought a hammer. Look, I've got a hammer. look, I took this hammer and I built this thing. It's the person who took the hammer and built the thing, and being able to tell a story around that, that really is powerful. Um, I was a sponsor for our Toastmasters group at HP when I was back in San Diego. Uh, one's ability to articulate themselves clearly, inspire, and influence is an extremely valuable skill. So you might be very, very sort of book or subject matter smart, but being able to use that inside of the workplace and how you communicate, whether it's verbal or written, very powerful. So if that's an area that you think is an opportunity for you, I'd say go for it. And that Toastmasters group is one where there's like-minded people from other companies that you can use to grow your network. And those people often know about job opportunities inside of those companies, and that could be a good way in the door as well.
Our students are going to have options on how they do their capstone type projects, and one of them is an experiential project. HP, you yourself and HP has sponsored several of them over the past several years. When you're looking at a resume, do you put any attention on those experiential projects that students have done?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, it's just a great example of how you've taken the hammer and built the house, right? Because you applied it to something very, very real. And those present very good storytelling opportunities inside of a resume. So yeah, I'm a huge fan of that approach, and definitely look for it.
Awesome. Several of our students asked me when we're doing our one-on-one, I feel like I'm a great fit for a certain job, but there's a skills gap between a certain type of information systems like SAP that I don't have. We kind of touched upon it in a previous answer, but one of the pieces of advice that I always give them is do something about that skills gap. Even if you don't necessarily have time to take a certificate or to completely train yourself, go out and buy a book, go to the library, start to learn something about SAP, and a company like HP will train you the rest of the way. What do you think about that advice, or what would your other advice be to students, about those skills gaps?
Agree with the advice completely. And try to find creative ways where you can demonstrate the skill. There are an awful lot of even nonprofit groups out there that if you can become aware of what they're about, maybe it's synergistic with who you are, and you can apply your hammer to their problem, uh, gives you a real world example of how you demonstrated a skill set.
You've really had a lot of wonderful advice for our students. I really appreciate you taking the time to share that. Do you have
Of
any
course.
other piece of advice that we didn't cover that you want to give before I'd open it up to Q&A?
I mean, maybe the biggest one I would hit on is I mentioned it earlier, but the self-awareness piece and importance of emotional intelligence. Those are very, very powerful. I don't know if in the program these days there's anything that students go through to get a bit of a self-assessment to give them insights into who they are. But anyone aspiring to be a leader of people needs to be extremely self-aware of who they are and sort of where they're coming from. When you get stuff coming at you, it's coming through your own personal filters, and how you respond to the situations is definitely influenced by that. And the more you're aware of yourself in situations like that, I think the more effective you will be as a leader. So clearly the book stuff is very important, but don't miss the other soft skill stuff. It's critical.
Great piece of advice. And our Career Management Center, for our students that might not be aware, does offer those types of self-assessments, Career Leader being one of them, but several others. So if you're interested in them, let me know and I will set you up with them. Personal branding is something that you can talk to me about, and we have a current executive in residence who's taken on several faculty type of roles or lecturing roles. His name is Mark Lindner, and he's a general manager for Miller Coors Corporation. So he would be a great person to reach out to talk about personal branding. So thank you for that piece of advice, John. Let me open it up to our students. It looks like we lost a trio of them. They probably had to go off to class, but we still have Elias and Yogesh. And we also have a special guest, Dr. Steve Gill, who joined us. Anybody have some questions for John?
Hello, thank you very much for this very insightful conversation. No, good. And Greg made it very hard for us to find good questions now with everything. But personally, I had a question. I was wondering, how did your engineering background help you in your current operation management career? And as a follow-up to that question, I was wondering how a student without that engineering background, like that's been in business all his academic career, can differentiate himself or like stand out for those project manager roles that maybe require some knowledge about the technicalities and.
Very good question. So let me hit the first one. Just how does the engineering background help me in my operations role? Our manufacturing assets are big pieces of steel. A lot of it's automated. So having a background in its mechanical engineering is what I studied. So usually you try to boil manufacturing processes down into time, temperature, and pressure. Those are some of the basics of what you're doing inside of just about any mechanical manufacturing process. So the engineering background allows me to have some intuition on sort of a proposal that comes my way, and I can have some sense of, boy, I think you're sort of disobeying some of the laws of physics. And when you see something like that, you kind of pause with the team and you ask questions in a way that maybe allows them to see things through your lens, and that they step back and, okay, well, we'll go take a look at it again. So that's one area. And I'd say the biggest thing I learned in engineering school was problem solving. And that is a skill set that's applicable anywhere. It's not just an engineering skill set. So fortunate to have both of those. You don't need an engineering background to be a successful leader. You'll have technical depth in areas different than someone like me who has an engineering background. Like I understand finance well enough to be dangerous most of the time. I mean, I understand the basics of sort of a profit and loss statement, the cash flow statement, et cetera. And then I apply my problem solving and leadership skills to make sure we're managing the business in the way where the financial metrics are hit. A leader is oftentimes, the good ones are very good at surrounding themselves with other very good people who have skill sets in areas that they don't. So for me, I'm conscious of my blind spots. Yours maybe is technical because you don't have an engineering background, but in a role where you're leading, who is the person that's your trusted technical advocate? The person you go to outside of maybe a big meeting and say, hey, that proposal on that oven or that car or whatever, give me your technical assessment of it. And that's someone you trust, and they trust you, and they help you navigate that. Hopefully that's helpful for you.
Yes, definitely. Thank you.
John, on that skill set, several of our students, they're going through our MBA program, are international business leaders or have experience in international business. Would you say that would be a competitive advantage for a company like yours? And how should students market that skill?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Whether it's awareness of the culture or even just the ability to speak the language, That's huge. When I was leading HP's paper business, we did a lot of manufacturing over in Asia, and I do not speak Mandarin yet, I guess is the way to put it. But when I was hiring sort of PhD level chemists, I looked to identify at least some who knew how to speak that language. So when we were doing business in that part of the world, they could connect much more efficiently than, say, going through a translator. So international awareness, appreciation of culture, ways of doing things, even network of people in those regions, that's very, very powerful. I mean, the world is a smaller and smaller place. I mean, if you don't have some international, at least awareness, that's almost a detriment these days.
Yeah. Yogesh, did you have a question for John?
No, I don't have a question. I'm very grateful that he was here, and I loved hearing to John today. Thank you so much for being there.
You're welcome.
Steve, how about you? The students had a chance to introduce themselves. Would you like to introduce yourself as well?
Sure. John, thanks again for coming. And Greg, I appreciate you allowing me to join. John, I'm an instructor, a professor of accounting in the Fowler College of Business. And I teach on occasion a management accounting course within the MBA program. And I teach extensively in the accounting graduate program, but that's probably less relevant for any conversation we're going to have. The reality is I want to tap in on a bunch of questions that are probably not interesting to the students. So what I'd like to do is make sure that Elias and Yogesh have exhausted any questions they have before I usurp any of the time on this call, because this is really about them. It's not about me.
I have one last question, actually. So for graduate students with like minimal job experience, what would be a good starting point in a company like HP to get in those, like as an entry point to get to those senior position jobs in operations and supply chain?
Well, so maybe
like
my initial.
I should look for, you know, I don't know if that makes sense.
Okay, you're breaking up a little bit there. Make sure I appreciate your question, and I'm answering what you're asking. So your question was rooted in, I don't have a whole bunch of experience. How do I get myself in the door? And what are the things that I should do because I aspire to be a senior level manager? Is that
exactly, like what kind of job titles and like entry level jobs I should apply for, like in my situation, like for a company like HP? That would lead to those senior position in operations and supply chain.
Yeah. Okay. Very good. So the first thing I will suggest to you is don't get too caught up on a title. Mm-hmm. I've met people who are directors or vice presidents, and they're managing one person. Where I've had director, in fact, my job technically now is a director, and there's like more than 500 people inside of my organization. So title can be very misleading. What's more important, I suggest you lead with, are your skills. What are you bringing to a position? And be very intentional in being able to tell someone how you get things done. For us at HP, we very much value collaborative and teamwork. We very much are not fans of, yeah, you accomplished this very great thing, you did, but there's all these, we'll use language like dead bodies along the way. You compromised relationships, you corrupted an external partnership. We made a bunch of money, a partner lost money, so next week that partnership evaporates. Be very intentional with the how when you're telling your story. Yeah, getting started is tough. I would tell you, look for every opportunity to find ways to use the skills you're developing at school. Get yourself involved in groups where you can apply these skills. Volunteer if you can. Look for internships. Don't be too proud to do something temporary to get a skill, and that's a stepping stone for you getting the full-time position. I mean, be open to your path to the top is probably not going to be straight to the top. It's be okay with that. It's a long life in front of you. Of
Thank you for the advice. Very insightful.
course.
All right, Elias, any more questions? Yogesh, if you have questions that came up, chance to jump in before I let Steve get back in.
I need to be respectful of John's time. I'm sure that Greg only set aside till 6 with you, John. And it sounds like you're located in Singapore, and I can't quite do that time conversion in my head, but it's probably very early in the morning in my mind. So I appreciate you.
Of course, you're welcome. And if you want to set up a time offline, just you and I, we can
thank
talk
you.
accounting. Absolutely.
Well, I tell you what, if you don't mind, I'd like to just hammer in a couple quick questions, because I know Greg always has like a nice closing to get to. And these are more programmatic level. So I need you to think back, John, to when you were going through as a student. What would you say were kind of the most important takeaways from the MBA program that you walked away with? And I know you mentioned you finally received some exposure to kind of these fundamental business areas, and maybe that's really what it is. But can you think like, man, when I walked away with that MBA, I was so happy I was armed with blank.
Yeah, no, in no particular order, I would say an enhanced financial acumen,
Okay.
an appreciation of soft skills. I mean, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and you sort of translate that into keeping people happy inside of a workplace. Very, very important. Yeah, those are probably the two biggest ones that I walked away with.
Okay, thanks. I appreciate that. And I don't know if you're placating me by saying it was financial stuff, but that makes me feel pretty good.
Not at all. Not at all.
What would you say was simply deficient? Go ahead and be critical. What do you wish, now that you reflect back on that time, what do you wish the program had offered you that would have really made a difference?
So obviously the curriculum was very case study based, and I very much liked that. When we were presenting our results and getting feedback, it was pretty soft. If I think about, I'll present things inside of a corporate world, and while people will be polite, they'll also be very clear and direct with you on you're kind of full of it, or that's not right. And a hardening, if you will, of being in just a pressure cooker like that would have been a better if.
Great. I appreciate that feedback. That both of those are answers that I think we can use when we think about what we're going to do with our curriculum and how we're training our students. So that's wonderful. I appreciate it. Greg, there's no way that I haven't used up all the time that's left in this meeting. So I'm gonna mute myself and let you close it out.
Thanks, Steve. And
Thanks,
Steve
Steve
is actually also our director of assessment. So that's why he is very interested in helping us to improve the curriculum here at SDSU.
Wonderful.
John, just one last question, on my end. Yogesh and Elias, I'm sure they're still assimilating the information that they got here in this session, and we're going to have a lot of students that are going to be just viewing it online for the first time. Are you open for me to connect any of our students who want to ask you some additional questions?
Oh, of course. Always happy to help.
That, very much.
As long as we have some flexibility on the time zone, at least for the next couple of years. Absolutely.
Thank you so much. And John, you really have been a tremendous partner with SDSU. I appreciate everything you do. I appreciate the time that you spent today. And we did go over, I only allotted actually 45 minutes for this, but because the information that you were given was so great and you weren't telling me you had to get out of here, I let it continue. But thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. It's fun and my pleasure to give back like this, and happy to continue to do so.
Okay. Well, you have a great day, and for everybody in our time zone, have a great evening.
Have a great evening.
This will conclude our session for this week.
Thank you.
All right. Take care, everybody.
Thank you, John.
Bye. You're
Thank
welcome.
you so much.
Thanks, Greg.